Good afternoon. This is Seraphim Hanish, American in Exile, reporting to you from Samara, Russia. As you see, the background is a little different. Um, we moved over the last year from Moscow to a town a bit further east in Russia named Samara, and it is from here that I now base what I do and my operations. And so I haven't done a video in quite a while, but I figured that today, November 21st, 2025, was a good time to do one because a rather interesting set of developments has come into play regarding a 28-point settlement plan or peace plan to end the Ukrainian-Russian conflict. Now, there are certainly going to be no shortages of people weighing in on this. Some people already have. My friends and colleagues with the Duran have been talking about this plan for several days before this, and the rumors about the plan were circulating in the news media for the last several days. But what happened overnight in Russian time was that the plan was actually given to President Zelensky, and somebody in the opposition party of the Ukrainian parliament got hold of it and got it translated into English, and RT published it, and it's been since published in several different places on Substack and other independent news writers and opinion people like myself. So what I want to do is to try to give a little bit of an assessment of my own. Please keep in mind that all of this is, of course, while I will try to base things on the information that we actually have, one of the unfortunate facts of the geopolitical wonk world is that we tend to speculate a lot. I'm going to try not to speculate so much as to what is going to happen, but maybe try to offer what I believe is a little bit of a possibility, or more than that, actually, a theory about what has actually been going on. So, looking at the proposal, we have it. It's available on Russia Today, and it's available in other sources as well. But this plan makes several interesting. Well, everything is interesting, but it makes many interesting provisions, and I'm going to go through these, and you'll see on your screen the full text of the proposal as well. The first one is that Ukraine's sovereignty will be confirmed. Now, what that actually means is a little bit ambiguous, but you're going to find throughout this document that there are a few places of ambiguity. Ostensibly, this is because some of these points have not exactly been worked out in specifics. This plan apparently was developed through joint work between Steve Witkoff, the special envoy to the Middle East for Donald Trump, the President of the United States, and also reports consistently say that Kirill Dmitriev, one of the business leaders in Russia, and I'll give you his position more exactly in a little bit, that he was involved in this. He is reported as saying that this plan is more than just a ceasefire. It is actually a good example of Russia's needs being actually listened to. And I think that we will see that this is true. So anyway, first bit of the text. Ukraine's sovereignty will be confirmed. Number 2, a full and comprehensive non-aggression agreement will be concluded between Russia, Ukraine, and Europe. All ambiguities of the last 30 years will be considered resolved. This is quite interesting because while not being terribly specific in detail, it is very specific about the fact that this conflict is really not between Russia and Ukraine. It is between Russia and the West. It's Russia and Europe through the proxy of Ukraine. And of course, during Biden's administration, the United States was very solidly behind all of this too. The arguments among my colleagues and I take a different point. I do not believe that Trump is disingenuous when he says that he's not interested in having America involved in this. I think he means what he says, but I believe there are reasons why he often is seen to stop short from openly denouncing everything about Ukraine and going full on and siding with Russia in this conflict. And I'm going to get to that later because I think that's very important. Third, it is expected that Russia will not invade neighboring countries and that NATO will not expand further. So this is one of these diplomatic things. Russia isn't doing an expansion drive, but I believe that this point is stated this way simply to express parity as a diplomatic tool. A dialogue will be conducted, this is number 4, a dialogue will be conducted between Russia and NATO, mediated by the United States, to resolve all security issues and create conditions for de-escalation, thereby ensuring global security and increasing opportunities for cooperation and future economic development. This reflects President Trump's belief that if you cooperate with each other economically, then you're probably not going to fight each other. And there's a lot of truth to that. The tricky thing is that having a dialogue between Russia and NATO conducted by the United States could be seen as a rather suspicious thing, since the United States is basically the chief support and founding member, I guess, of NATO. However, if we look at this in light of the behavior that's been taking place over the last several months, where the United States has disengaged itself from the attitudes of the European NATO members and has tried to show itself as standing apart from them in regards to the conflict in Ukraine, it could be seen as somewhat of a reasonable mediation partner. I believe Trump believes that he can do this, but it is absolutely clear that there are many people in Russia who will not believe that this is legitimate because the United States has made such a bad reputation for itself in terms of its pushing everybody around in the world for the last 35 years, saying that it's the supreme superpower and that it can actually do that. So this is one of the probably a sticky issue. However, who the negotiation would be or the dialogue would be mediated by is also a little difficult to determine. Turkey is a NATO member, and while Turkey has expressed amazing independence in regards to this war, it is a NATO member, and the Turkish government has its own interests at heart, of course, just like the United States does. And it is not clear that they would be necessarily the best mediator. As for the other powers of NATO, the other significant powers, namely Britain and France and Germany, these 3 countries have gone completely over the top in terms of their anti-Russian rhetoric, and they would not be considered trustworthy mediators at this point. I don't think certainly not by the Russian Federation, and I don't think that even President Trump would consider them as worthy because of their record of rhetoric in this conflict. 5, Ukraine will receive reliable security guarantees. That's all it says. The Istanbul agreements, the first one anyway, specified that there would be, the idea was that there would be 7 nations that would be responsible for Ukrainians' security needs. Russia, the United States, Great Britain, France, Germany, Italy, and Poland, if I'm not mistaken. Alexander Mercouris talked about this in one of his broadcasts back in 2022. It was seen at that time as an excellent deal, but none of us knew that there was another plan going on underneath that later was admitted to by people like Angela Merkel, that the Minsk agreements were just designed to give Ukraine time to build build up its armaments and army and all that kind of stuff. So, and given Germany under Friedrich Merz and Britain under Stammer and France under Macron, again, these major players in Europe do not show themselves to be reliable guarantors of Ukraine's security concerns because they are so virulent with their rhetoric against Russia. So we need the security guarantees will come from somewhere, and I will here offer a tiny bit of speculation to suggest that perhaps one of the countries that might be involved in this would be Hungary. But I also would suggest maybe countries such as Turkey itself, maybe Saudi Arabia, China. The United States would probably be involved in it as well, and Russia. I think it's very important that both Russia and the United States are involved in this. So, but this is based on the stipulation that Russia and the United States are the only adults in the room in terms of wanting to deal with this issue, because currently the European leaders are acting like insane children. Okay, so yes, I said it. I will say it again too. They are acting like insane children. Brats. The size of the armed forces of Ukraine will be limited to 600,000 personnel. Now, in the copy that I have from Russia Today, the 6 is in parentheses, and I don't know why. I don't know. So what I'm saying next is simply in that ignorance. I don't know if this is a sign that this number is raisable or lowerable, reducible. But it might be a problem, as Larry Johnson has stated in his reports, that during the first Istanbul agreements, they were looking at a Ukrainian armed forces total of something like 88,000 soldiers. And this is way, way more than that, 600,000. And it's actually not far from where it is at this point in the conflict, with something like 500,000 people on the front lines at any given day. On the Ukrainian side, sometimes 400,000, sometimes as much as 600,000. It seems too big to me, but this is probably going to be one of the negotiating points. Number 7, Ukraine agrees to enshrine in its constitution that it will not join NATO, and NATO agrees to include in its statutes a provision that it will not accept Ukraine in the future. This is a very important red line for Russia. It's good to see that this is actually what's being offered in the agreement, because this is one of the root causes of the conflict that has been repeatedly stated by representatives of the Russian Federation, by myself, and also by the president of the Russian Federation himself and Sergei Lavrov and all the others. We've been very consistent on this issue. NATO agrees not to deploy troops in Ukraine. This is very simple. There will probably, assuming that we get this far, there will probably be additional language to specify beyond the shadow of a doubt that that really means no NATO troops in Ukraine. There's no way to work around it, no worming your way around it on technicalities, training, whatever it is. Okay, number 9 is an interesting one. European fighter aircraft will be stationed in Poland. I don't know the reason for this idea. As far as I understand, European fighter aircraft are already stationed in Poland. So it's unclear to me as if this is intended to be kind of a figurative give on to the Western side to show, okay, since Poland is close to Russia's border, we're going to make it look and appear strong as, as insurance that Russia doesn't have any expansionist aspirations or anything like that. But it's unclear, and I don't think that this would be something that Russia would particularly object to. but the lack of any real specific language here suggests that this is a point that is meant to be ambiguous for various reasons right now, probably just to have something to negotiate. Um, Number 10, U.S. guarantees. The United States will receive compensation for the guarantee. It doesn't say what the guarantee is, but then it goes on to say what it might be. If Ukraine invades Russia, it will lose the guarantee. If Russia invades Ukraine, in addition to a decisive, coordinated military response, all global sanctions will be reinstated. Recognition of new territories and all other benefits of this deal will be revoked. If Ukraine without cause launches a missile at Moscow or St. Petersburg, the security guarantee will be considered invalid. I would imagine that would be amended to probably say something like if Ukraine launches a missile at any Russian city, and not just Moscow or Petersburg. But I think my speculation is that this is setting the tone for what will be determined in the future and giving a little bit of specificity to the condition. Number 11, Ukraine retains the right to European Union membership and will receive short-term preferential access to the European market while the issue is under consideration. Now, this was one of the things that was discussed in the first Istanbul Agreement. I don't believe it was an existing condition that survived to what we call Istanbul Plus, which was a document that was, or a set of ideas that was reached about a year ago in the summer of 2024. But in the original draft agreement, which Zelensky actually got so far as to initial before Boris Johnson told him, tear it up, don't do it, we'll give you weapons, you keep fighting. The idea was that Ukraine could not be a member of NATO, and it would not ever be able to be used in any way by NATO forces, but that it could join the European Union and also remain as a free trade partner, I believe, with Russia and possibly with the Eurasian Economic Union. The idea was actually extremely good because this was April 2022. It gave Ukraine a window to the West while not closing its relationship with Russia, and it gave it one of the best trade deals that you could possibly ever imagine. And think about this. This is what Zelensky threw away when he accepted Boris's instructions to fight on. He threw away a really good chance at a great future for a very poor country that needs a lot of help. And so it looks like this idea is a real gift for Ukraine to try to help it resolve its own very significant economic problems and corruption problems that stem largely from how bad the economy is and how poor this country has been for so many years. So, number 12, it's rather extensive. It's broken into 6 categories. A powerful global package of measures for the reconstruction of Ukraine, including, but not limited to, 1A, creation of a Ukraine Development Fund to invest in high-growth sectors, including technology, data processing centers, and artificial intelligence. We see this over and over. Everybody's talking about artificial intelligence, but of that more anon, maybe. B, the United States will cooperate with Ukraine on the joint reconstruction, develop, modernization, and operation of Ukraine's gas infrastructure, including pipelines and storage facilities. Okay. C, joint efforts to restore war-affected territories, including the reconstruction and modernization of cities and residential areas. D, which is much like C, infrastructure development. E, extraction of minerals and natural resources. That calls to mind the rare earths deal that I believe Zelensky never actually signed it, or that if he signed it, it doesn't really mean anything. I'll have to check on that, but I think it was the latter. And F, The World Bank will develop a special financing package to accelerate these efforts. So again, we have the idea of Trump's solution is let's do business together, and if we do business together, perhaps that will be good incentive not to kill each other. Number 13, Russia will be reintegrated into the global economy. Now, for me, that's kind of important because I live in Russia and I enjoy all the fruits of all the sanctions that are on us and how I cannot transfer money in and out of this country to anywhere in the West. And I can't, we have all this crazy stuff about VPNs now that can't, to access sites that we can't access because they've been blocked, all of this kind of stuff. I can pretty much get anywhere, but sometimes it doesn't quite work. And sometimes, those connections, the ability that I have to make connections sometimes changes from one day to the next, such as reality. Some of that is to protect us from traceability by incoming Ukrainian weaponry, because they sometimes triangulate on our internet signals and stuff like that. So with cell phones and the like. So Russia will be reintegrated into the global economy. The lifting of sanctions will be discussed and agreed upon gradually and on an individual basis. I suggest that this point is going to actually include some kind of a large-scale lifting of sanctions. And speculatively and wishfully speaking, I would make the suggestion that all sanctions that were placed on Russia from the time that the Russiagate scandal broke up until now should be revoked immediately. And the reason why is because Russiagate itself is one of these driving forces that helped lead us into this war in the first place by increasing irrational sanctions and sanctions without foundation on this country. There needs to be an amends from the United States for what it did in terms of imposing all of these sanctions. And I know that won't fly with the neocon members of Congress and the neo-libs and a great many congressional members who are in the same age group as I am and who were educated very deeply in a Cold War Soviet mentality about Russia. If you want to see proof of this, go watch Fox News and watch anything that you hear General Keane talk about, or some of the other guests when they get somebody like Brett Baer, and they interview somebody that is supposed to be in the know about Ukraine or Russia. The amount of propaganda that just comes out of their mouth to frame the news piece is incredible. And as much as I'm a conservative, I have to tell you that these days, Fox's competitor, CNN, is doing a much fairer job of reporting this stuff. And it's kind of interesting as to why, probably because CNN lives to oppose Trump, but if they oppose Trump on something like this, it might look good for them, so they are a little gentler on Russia, where Fox tries to fool its listeners and watchers into thinking that it does support Trump, but Trump is largely behind a lot of this deal. This plan apparently is based on how the plan that was used to bring an end so far to the Israel-Gaza conflict. So anyway, the lifting of sanctions will be discussed and agreed upon gradually and on an individual basis. B, the United States will conclude a long-term economic cooperation agreement aimed at mutual development in the fields of energy, natural resources, infrastructure, artificial intelligence, data processing centers, rare earth mining projects in the Arctic, and other mutually beneficial corporate opportunities. And C, Russia will be invited to return to the G8. Now, I talked to a friend of mine about this, and this last point, he is a Russian, and he adamantly disagreed with this idea. The Russian Federation was a member of the G8 for a while. They sometimes called it the G7 plus or plus one, because Russia's economy was quite a lot smaller than the seventh member of G7. However, Russia's economy is growing, but it's also developing a new economic alliance called BRICS with China, Brazil, India, and many, many more other countries as a potential new uh, monetary standard bearer and a whole new economic ecosystem for the world to run on that would be ostensibly in competition with the Western, with the United States and Western Europe and its economic agreements. Um, but at the same time, the here again, I believe, is the necessity of the West offering an apology. So inviting Russia to a return to the G8 is something that Russia will probably not accept, but they will probably graciously decline, at least in the near term. But the invitation, if we do this, the invitation will be opened and will probably remain open because at least this shows a willingness on the West's part to correct what it did very improperly by condemning Russia for the referenda in Crimea and for other things and for trying to freeze it out of everything. Russia has won in this. A lot of this really is an indication of just how much Russia has won. And so inviting them to return to the G8 is kind of like a witness to the fact that Russia is a survivor and that it is doing a really good job. And it's better to make a friend of somebody like that than it is to alienate them and make them possibly a worse adversary or even worse as an enemy than before under any circumstances. So number 14, this is a tricky one. Frozen assets will be used in the following way. I should say this, that to my knowledge, approximately $300 billion of Russian assets are frozen in Europe, and that the Europeans, while not taking that money for fear of awful recriminations, which they should be afraid of, they have taken it on themselves to use the interest that is earned from this frozen money, which is still earning money. They're using the interest for that ostensibly to help Ukraine. Now, what that means, I don't know. I don't know if that means they're sending it to Zelensky so he can buy houses or buy cocaine, or if they're actually doing something to try to help Ukraine out or not. But Russia has been complaining about this, and they have a valid argument that even though the interest is money made off of the $300 billion, it's still stealing Russia's money because that money really should belong to the Russian Federation. So with that in mind, this is what the plan says. Frozen assets will be used in the following way. $100 billion of frozen Russian assets will be invested in U.S.-led reconstruction and investment efforts in Ukraine. The United States will receive 50% of the profits from this undertaking. It doesn't say who receives the other amount of profits, which is interesting. Europe will add another 100 billion to increase the total investment available for Ukraine's reconstruction. Now, this is interesting because it doesn't say Europe will add another $100 billion from the frozen Russian assets. It looks like they're asking for Europe to put in $100 billion of its own money. Frozen European assets will be unfrozen. Okay, I guess that means the Russian assets. The remaining frozen Russian assets will be invested in a separate Russian-American or American-Russian investment vehicle that will implement joint American-Russian projects in areas to be determined. This fund will be aimed at strengthening bilateral relations and increasing shared interests in order to create strong motivation not to return to conflict. And so there it is. That's the reasoning for this is stated very clearly. If we do business together, we probably won't fight. So you see me coming back to this point many times. Number 15, a joint American working group on security issues will be established to facilitate and ensure the fulfillment of all provisions of this agreement. Number 16, Russia will legislatively enshrine a policy of non-aggression toward Europe and Ukraine. Okay, I believe this is a diplomatic pitch. Russia already has no aggressive intents towards Europe or Ukraine, other than the fact of the special military operation because of what was happening in Ukraine in the first place. 17, the United States and Russia will agree to extend the validity of treaties on the non-proliferation of nuclear weapons and arms control, including START 1. I don't know if they mean START 2. I'm not sure about that. This could be an error. Or what they call New START. But yes, this is a good idea. Number 18, Ukraine agrees to remain a non-nuclear state in accordance with the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons. Keep in mind that it was exactly this that was the final straw for President Putin, where Zelensky talked about the idea that it was no longer necessary to follow the Bucharest Agreement, or Budapest Agreement, that said that Ukraine would never be a nuclear weapons power. And the day after, I believe it was the day after, Zelensky said, we're going to trash that whole idea and become nuclear. I think the SMO started the very next day. 19, the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant will be restarted under IAEA supervision, that's International Atomic Energy Agency, and the generated electricity will be split equally between Russia and Ukraine, 50-50. The Zaporozhye power plant is the largest power plant in Europe. It has a lot of reach. It's been shut down during the course of the war because nuclear power plant, right? Being bombed is a bad idea. You can get some bad accidents, and anybody that remembers Chernobyl can remember how that can go, especially the people that survived Chernobyl. So IAEA supervision, one of the really tricky things here is that the IAEA has been very disingenuous in the history of this whole thing. They will acknowledge that the power plant has been repeatedly shelled, but they won't tell you by who, because if they tell you that it's by Ukraine, that goes against the European narrative. So they just say, we don't know who shelled it, or we can't tell you who shelled it, because they want to make it look like Russia, whose forces are in control of the power plant, are actually bombing themselves. So I find this a dubious point, but I don't know of any better thing to do, though my colleague says that all of the power should be used for Russia. And maybe that's a good point, considering what's been going on. Number 20, both countries undertake to introduce educational programs in schools and society that promote understanding and tolerance of different cultures and the elimination of racism and prejudice. Now, this is not woke stuff, at least not the way I understand it. Russia is not a woke country by any means. It's quite traditional, even though it's quite crazy. If somebody has crazy culture, then it happens. And if somebody has traditional culture, that happens too. And both are at least allowed to continue to be, and there are no activist drives trying to remove one or the other. That said, what this is about, and you'll see it as we go further, is that this is about the, oops, look at that. My magnet did something funny. This is about the whole problem of the Russian language being banned in Ukraine, and having problems with the attacks against the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, which was formerly a Moscow Patriarchate autonomous church, highly autonomous, basically completely independent, but still associated with the Moscow Patriarchate. And there's been massive religious persecution in the country, thanks to the effort of Ukrainian nationalists, the wiles of the Ecumenical Patriarch of Constantinople, sorry about this, and how do you call it? And a lot of liberals in the West. So, to that end, there are a few details. Ukraine will adopt European Union rules on religious tolerance and protection of linguistic minorities. Both countries agree to lift all discriminatory measures and to guarantee the rights of Ukrainian and Russian media and education, and all Nazi ideology and activity must be rejected and prohibited. So this is coming as well. So you see, we've got the reference to Nazi ideology, and which has been carefully screened from view in the West, but it's nevertheless it's quite true. I've got a gimbal here that's acting up. That's why all the movement is there. And so Ukraine is going to stop this, and this also serves as an admission to the world that the West knows this is going on and that we are acknowledging it and that it's going to get stopped. Territories. This is one of the stickiest points here, and I will dwell on it a little bit. Crimea, Lugansk, and Donetsk will be recognized de facto as Russian, including by the United States. That's a good, important point. Kherson and Zaporozhye will be frozen along the kind of line of contact, which will mean de facto recognition along the line of contact. I guess that means if Russian forces are in these places at the time that the agreement is agreed to, those places will be considered Russia, and the places where they are not, or that are under Ukrainian control, will be considered Ukrainian. However, the language is not exactly specific, so I suspect this might be a debate point. Russia renounces other territories. The translator of this, or the editor, actually the editor of the news article, thought that this probably refers to those parts of Kharkov, Sumy, and Dnipropetrovsk oblasts, which are presently under Russian control also. And the next part is that Ukrainian forces will withdraw from that part of Donetsk Oblast that they currently control. There's not much left. In fact, by the time this is agreed to, this may be a non-issue because Russia may have all of it. This withdrawal zone will be regarded as a neutral demilitarized buffer zone, internationally recognized as territory belonging to the Russian Federation. So the DMZ that they want to pick up is going to be considered Russian land, which is interesting. Russian forces, however, will not enter this demilitarized zone. Now, the trick with this is that we have two different stories coming out of Russia, and I think they're both true. One story was earlier on saying that Russia demands that all of the people, all of the territories that are named Lugansk, Donetsk, Zaporozhye, Kherson, that all of these oblasts in their borderline configurations as they were as oblasts of Ukraine must be ceded to Russia. However, another thought that kind of circulated, we heard it in the West from time to time, was the idea that maybe this would be agreed to, that whatever is occupied by Ukraine would remain Ukrainian and whatever is occupied by Russia would remain Russian. Now, the problem is that there were referenda in 2022 in all four provinces determining who wanted to join Russia or not. The lowest positive answer came from Kherson. 57% of the voters said they wanted to join Russia. The problem is this. I don't think that the people in the Ukrainian-controlled territory of Kherson or Zaporozhye or Donetsk or Lugansk had the ability to vote in the referendum. I think the only people that were able to vote in the referenda were people that were in areas that were actually under Russian control. And so this brings a legal issue up. And, for everything that people say about President Putin being evil KGB guy, I don't know how evil he is. I don't think he's evil at all personally. But evil KGB guy doesn't really square compared to what he actually is. And what he is apparently is an attorney. That's how he was trained. So that's why he speaks in such careful terms and goes on for a long time, because like Alexander Makuras, who also is a former attorney, you want to be really precise in your language when you're making a legal argument. And so the question here is whether or not President Putin would truly be willing to accept that those parts of these territories that are not under Russian control might actually remain Ukrainian land. There's a question for President Putin. This is a question for the Russian people that are very patriotic in the most part and are more inclined to probably think of these lands as all theirs because there were referenda. But I still think it's an issue. The possible ways around that issue would be limited to something like, for example, let's take Donetsk, which voted something like 97% to join Russia, but there was some part of Donetsk that was not under Russian control. If that part that was not under Russian control had a population that was not large enough to swing the balance beyond 50-50, but like say if all of them voted and it was still something like 75%, let's join Russia, then I can see the argument for the whole province joining Russia. But in a place like Kherson, where the presumably occupied part of it voted 57% to join Russia, and maybe the other part doesn't want to, and how many people are there? Are there enough to take that 57% and make it be over 50% the other way? If there are, then the question comes as to whether or not maybe referenda might want to be offered in Zaporozhye especially and Kherson especially to see what those people in the Ukrainian-controlled areas want to do. I do know that there are people in those areas that are Russian speakers. I've spoken to some of them in the past in communications, and they may actually want to be part of Russia, but there also may be a substantial argument for the sake of legality that it's a bad idea to just assume this. So this is one of my questions. I tried to do a lookup to see if there was any information about the fate of the people that were not in Russian-controlled areas, and I didn't find anything. Perhaps somebody else can, and you can get to me, or you can do your own piece about it. But this would be something that I think this is a negotiable, though not a very pleasant negotiable for the more patriotic of us among the Russian people, who might want to just say, "No, it's all ours." Even though this is not a war for land, there is something about having more land that is rather exciting, and it's not necessarily possible to disengage that passion from the reality of the situation. So I think this is a tricky issue, and it may be something that gets brought up. So anyway, the other thing that I find is that the recognition of these places as de facto Russian, we will see in the next statement, looks like this comes up for grabs as well. And perhaps it refers to my point that I just was making. After future territorial arrangements are agreed, both the Russian Federation and Ukraine undertake not to change these arrangements by force. Any security guarantees will not apply in the event of violation of this commitment. So it seems to suggest that after de facto recognition, there will continue to be some discussion about what happens next as you hopefully move from de facto to de jure. And perhaps in that conversation, we might consider what happens to those parts of territories that are questionable because of how much of their territory was actually occupied and population and all of those questions that I said before. But this does seem to say that the conversation will not end with a de facto recognition. It's probably going to move in some way towards de jure. And based on what was discussed in the Verkhovna Rada a couple of days ago when they suspended their operations, it seems to me that the new administration that seems to be getting ready to take shape, with or without Zelensky, is going to try to settle this war, and they may actually cede the territories. The spokesperson who announced the cessation of operations for the Rada seems to be reasonable her rhetoric, and so I would not be surprised at all if there was at least a cession of the full territories of Zaporozhye and Kherson, and maybe even some kind of referenda for Kharkiv, and maybe Sumy. Probably wouldn't be one for Odessa, but you never know. I mean, there may be it may be determined that it's a better idea if they want to be associated with Russia to let them, and it may be a good opportunity to give them a vote. Is it realistic? Maybe not, but maybe so. So I'm just throwing that out. Let's see what happens. Number 23. Russia will not obstruct Ukraine's commercial use of the Dnieper River, and agreements will be reached on the free transportation of grain across the Black Sea. So that's from the old Black Sea Agreement back in 2022. 24 points, the 24th point, a humanitarian committee will be created to resolve outstanding issues. For example, A, all remaining prisoners and bodies will be exchanged on the all-for-all principle. B, all civilian detainees and hostages will be returned, including children. C, a family reunification program will be implemented. You can thank Melania Trump for part of that work. And also, D, measures will be taken to alleviate the suffering of conflict victims. Point 26, Ukraine will hold elections 100 days after this agreement is signed. If what I'm understanding from the leader of Verkhovna Rada is true, those elections are going to happen a lot sooner than 100 days. That was the implied message from yesterday or the day before. Number 26, all parties involved in the conflict will receive full amnesty for actions committed during the war and will undertake not to file claims or pursue complaints in the future. In other words, whatever beastly things you did during the conflict, we're not going to prosecute you. And that, I imagine, is one of the big selling points for Mr. Zelensky himself, because in the last few days he's been out. He spends a lot of time outside Ukraine. Lately, he and several of the other officials have either left Ukraine permanently or are traveling anywhere not to be in Ukraine, because it seems that with this corruption scandal over Energoatom that was going on for a while, that still is, these people are scared for their lives because they know they're in trouble. It is a reasonable guess to assume that the Energoatom scandal is something that was dug up by the United States as a means of pushing Zelensky into a corner where he has to make an agreement, because otherwise bad things are coming for him. And if he doesn't agree to this, there will be more bad things that we find out that are coming. And so you can imagine that there's probably Zelensky is certainly a very instinctive man. Imagine when it comes to preserving his own life, and he's probably not going to want to take a speedy path to a grave. And there are plenty of people that would probably like to help him get there. I'm not one of them, by the way. I'm really not. I supported him. Actually, I was hoping the best for him when he was running for president. I didn't realize, as many people probably didn't realize, what he really was. But that said, as an American and as a Russian, I don't have animosity towards him on a running basis. I get really upset with the things he does sometimes, but there's a saying there, but for the grace of God go I. The guy's in a mess. And one of the nasty things about wars is that when they start, they get bitterer and bitterer and bitterer until somebody wins. It's not, just my bad, let's stop. So, for example, agreements like this are kind of rare. They're a modern artifact. I would say probably more than they are an ancient one. In ancient times, as talked about in the Bible, when a king with 10,000 soldiers sees another army coming with 20,000, He doesn't waste his time going into a fight. He sends emissaries to sue for peace. It's like, why would we do this? Well, nowadays we do dare to do this, but we also sometimes have these kind of agreed upon terms to end the war. All right, number 27, we're almost done. This agreement will be legally binding. Its implementation will be monitored and guaranteed by a peace council headed by President Trump. Predetermined sanctions will apply in the event of violations. So this one might be challenged because you've got President Trump in charge, and while there is an argument that since essentially it was the United States in its unipolar moment and its unipolar leadership that pulled the strings necessary to create this conflict, it should be the United States that helps to heal it. But in looking at this, I have another opinion. I think that such a peace council needs to be led also by a significant Russian, probably President Putin. And I think that's enough. I don't think we need a European because if we had a European, it would have to be somebody like Viktor Orban or Fico or something like that, or maybe, I can hear one of my colleagues screaming disagreement with me right now over this one, Giorgia Meloni. The reason I think Meloni might be, maybe, if not Meloni, maybe Matteo Salvini, perhaps, not a president, but a very, very good man in Italy. So the reason that I say this is that Italy has, maybe not as visibly as the rest of Europe, but Italy has maintained a relationship with the Russian Federation rather quietly during the whole course of this conflict. We still get plenty of deliveries of foodstuffs from Italy. They have refused to expand the conflict through use of their own troops, and they seem to have, among all of the Western European countries that are Ukraine happy, Italy seems to be the most sober of them. Then you have to get to the people that are truly sober, in my opinion, which are Czech Republic, Hungary, and Slovakia, I believe. So anyway, this peace council might have multilateral leadership. It would probably be more comfortable for Russia, especially if Russia has somebody of its own that is a co-leader, of equal rank in this idea as the president, Trump. So last is that once all parties have agreed to and signed this memorandum, the ceasefire will enter into force immediately after both sides withdraw to the agreed position so that implementation of the agreement can begin. So there is the plan. We've burned up 50 minutes. If you're still with me, God bless you. You must have a real appetite for boredom or punishment, but I really appreciate you sticking with me. I think I made some of the points that I was going to make along here, but one of the things that led me to do this video is that, most of the time I don't do any kind of videos because usually there is somebody else that has already said what needs to be said, and maybe my points aren't really that worth, sitting down here and taking an hour or two and three and production time and all that to do a video, because not very many people watch my videos anyway. So, and I do too many other things to really want to develop an audience in this area, but still, I was watching this developing story over the last 3 or 4 days, and I'm responding to it because I've got a feeling that it's pretty legitimate. I commented to my wife about 2 days ago. I said, I think the war is about to end. And I could be totally irrational. We might look at this in 5 days and you can say, God, what a fool Seraphim was for saying something like that. And I would agree with you. But this seems concrete. My understanding is that Kirill Dmitriev and Steve Witkoff worked on this together, and that Kirill is quoted as saying that he's very pleased with this because it is not just a ceasefire, it is actually a situation where the Russian side of this argument is being listened to. And certainly, we see a lot of evidence of that. No NATO membership for Ukraine, the restoration of Russian language and culture guaranteed, maybe not particularly specified, but language and culture, cessation of Nazi ideology and activity, and all discriminatory measures for Russian and Ukrainian media and education, all that kind of stuff. So there are a lot of places where Russia is getting what it wants. What is Ukraine getting that it wants? Well, what does Ukraine want? Let's think about that. What does Ukraine really want? Well, you might say, and we might get away with saying they don't want to be invaded by Russia. Okay, but what do they want? What was the reason that they were getting so militarized in the first place? Now, think about this very carefully, because during the run-up to the war, they were militarizing because Russia was going to invade. Period, end of sentence, end of paragraph. Why would they do that? Oh, Russia's going to invade because it wants to expand the Soviet Union and be the Soviet Union again. It wants to become an empire like it was before. And none of that stuff holds any water. President Putin spoke very specifically about that. He said this thing that anybody who does not, in Russia, that is to say, anybody who does not regret the ending of the Soviet Union has no heart, but anybody who wants to bring it back has no brains. And the reason that he says this is because the Soviet Union, for all of its problems, especially when you get to where it was in the 1980s and late 1970s and 1980s, it wasn't that great a place, but it was stable. And, one of the things that is a hallmark of life in Russia after the dissolution of the Soviet Union was a terrible, terrible period of instability where your money might be worth, you might have 10,000 rubles and it might be worth $100,000 one day and zero the next day, almost that bad, almost that literally. And there were people that were starving. We talk about the bread lines during communism, but by many people's reports that I've listened to here, living here, they don't talk about bread lines during communism. They do talk about lines for food and people not being able to buy it during the 1990s, after the Soviet Union fell and when it was just a wreck of a country for a while. And it was even, by some people's estimation, driven further under the hail because some of the American policymakers that were active in Russia were trying to actually plunder it instead of actually help it get on its feet. Now, that's not entirely true everywhere. American investors did try to help Russia. They did do some good things, but there was a lot of bad mixed in with the good. There was a lot of sentiment that still echoes sometimes today in the West, that Russia is too big, that it should be split up and plundered for its natural resources and all that kind of stuff. There are plenty of people that say things like that in their rhetoric in the West. So we have this, all of this stuff. It's a very long-lasting situation. But that said, when I saw these developments coming, something told me, perhaps the spirit of delusion, but maybe not, something told me it's coming to a head. And I think that part is true. What can we expect to see over the next period? I would say two or three things. One is we'll probably see some pressure being applied on Zelensky to accept this deal. We will probably see Zelensky try to waffle on it, but I don't think that he will be allowed to waffle for very long before some new aspect of a corruption scandal or something worse appears. Trump has a real problem in America because most of the American media is all the mass media is completely dedicated to the idea that if it's Putin, it's bad, if it's Russia, it's bad, and therefore if it's Ukraine and if it's Zelensky, it's good. And the issues of Cold War mentality that were milked for all they were worth during the Russiagate false story, as we are now seeing, is true more and more every day. All of that stuff was used to increase the isolation of Russia and to increase the sense of Russia as a pariah state, pariah nation, and President Putin is a terrible, terrible, evil man, and all that kind of stuff. And my theory has been that one of the reasons why President Trump has not just said, hey guys, to hell with it. Ukraine is losing, Russia's winning. I want to go with the winners, and Russia needs to get what it's demanding, and Ukraine needs to stop fighting, and I'm out of this. I think one of the reasons why Trump has not been able to do that is not because he's wishy-washy and waffles everywhere and doesn't know what's going on. I think he knows exactly what's going on. His biggest problem in the United States is the American media that is so invested in this anti-Russia narrative, and which spent a lot of time during his first term persecuting him and prosecuting him in the court of public opinion about Russiagate, that if Trump were to all of a sudden say, you know what, we're going to do everything that President Putin wants, he's right, he would be impeached in a week. And while Fox News might wait a week before it joined the impeachment calls, every other major broadcasting cable network would say, look, or be forced to say, look, Russiagate was true. He is a Putin stooge because he's doing the will of the P-man. And that would be the end of it. And Fox would eventually have to join in, and in a week or two, he would be impeached and convicted and out of office. And then what would happen? Does that mean Vance is going to fix it as new president? Vance is a great guy. I'm convinced of that. But he's not ready to take on that. And with the magnification of the idea that Russiagate is vindicated through President Trump's actions, that would mean that it would be an issue impossible for Vance to face, because then they would just say he's another one. So this is a really good story, or a really good study, in my opinion, of what happens when you peddle a story that is false for so long that everybody starts to believe it. And it's dangerous. It is particularly dangerous because this kind of rhetoric has actually gotten people on Fox and other networks that are considered as sort of this is where I get my opinion from kind of thing, and where they start talking about doing possible actual hot war with Russia as an option, as a viable option. Russia's a nuclear power, and so is the United States. But in a nuclear war, once the first one goes up, all the other ones go, and once that happens, it's curtains for everybody. And if you want to talk about who won afterwards, if you happen to be one of the few survivors with boils on your face from radiation burns and no food because it's all dead, if you want to talk about victory in a situation like that, be my guest, but please leave me out of it because I don't want to be a part of that. So I think that Trump is up against this need to have something that shifts the narrative his way at least a little bit, and this corruption scandal is a good way of doing it, because after all, the United States has sent $300 and some odd billion by Trump's estimation, or more, to Ukraine. Some of it for weapons, some of it for support of the country. And what have we got to show for it? We've got 20% less Ukraine in existence. We've got a war that has, I'm going to give you a guesstimate, 2.5 million dead. Probably 1.5 of those Ukrainian and about 1 Russian is my guess. Could be completely wrong, but it's a lot of people that aren't alive anymore because of this stupid war that started because of somebody making up a story that Russia was a horrible power, and then amplifying it and amplifying it and amplifying it until it actually came to blows. So the people that developed Russiagate are responsible for this. Obama is responsible for this. Hillary Clinton is responsible for this. All of the people that bought into this story, James Clapper and Comey and all these people, they all share responsibility and have blood on their hands for the deaths of all of these people that otherwise would not be conscripted by force and sent to the battlefield in Ukraine, or even for the case of the Russians who are volunteers to go to fight. There are many sons and daughters that are not coming back. And it's all because somebody thought it was a good idea to spin up a lie and make it really, really big to try to get rid of somebody they didn't like, namely Donald Trump as president. So Trump's looking for the break. He has the ability to get it some way by saying, hey guys, what do you think about how your money's been used by these supposedly great people in Ukraine who are instead doing things like buying jet planes and buying houses and stealing money and enriching themselves while their countrymen die by the hundreds of thousands or even millions. So this seems to have worked a little bit. And I guess the gamble, my speculation, could be wrong, my speculation is that the gamble that is being taken right now by the Trump administration is that we've moved the needle enough with some of the revelations that have happened about Russiagate itself and about this corruption issue itself that we can actually make a push for ending this conflict the way that it needs to be resolved, which is basically on Russian terms. There's really nothing Ukraine has as a particular advantage from this plan, other than they have a chance not to be at war anymore and to have their country rebuilt, which is actually quite a good thing, and that the United States will help. We do pretty good engineering. I know people can be critical and say, well, our heyday is past, but we're pretty good at what we do, and we can improve and learn and all that kind of stuff. So I don't think it's a terribly bad proposition. So that's my speculation. But what do we do? Wait and see what Zelensky does is one. The Russian government, in the official capacity, has acted like this is nothing new, and they don't really acknowledge the plan. But I think that there is a diplomatic distancing that's taking place for that. I think it's by design, and we'll probably see a difference in that. Perhaps there will be a formal presentation of this plan after we get an answer from Zelensky. If we don't get an answer from Zelensky, or if he refuses to go along with it and says, forget it, I'm not going to do it, then that gets us back to the next question. Well, what does Trump do? And the answer to that may be a much more clear demarcation line, where it might look like something like, you know what? I'm out of this. We're not going to do anything more, and we're not going to help anybody anymore. Hopefully, adding weapons to the mix is a bad idea. Even selling them through NATO, I think, is a bad idea. I don't know if that will stop, but I just think it's a bad idea, because anything sold just perpetuates the conflict. But eventually Russia's going to win it. And as soon as Russia decisively wins it, if President Trump is in power, he's going to go and do everything he says he wants to do with Russia anyway, which is go to work and go to business and to lift the sanctions and do it. So it's really a matter of whether it's going to happen now with this agreement, and Ukraine in the situation that it is in now, or later when more Ukrainian territory is taken, when there is more scandal piled up against President Zelensky, and more lives lost. It's not going to go Ukraine's way. It just is not. There isn't the kind of things that one needs to make that happen are not going to happen. Maybe if China goes and or India goes and completely joins the Ukrainian army and they all fight Russia, it may, something really stupid like that, then you might get it. But China and India are happy campers with Russia, so they're not going to do it. So this is where we are, and there's a lesson in this about accepting reality and seeking to understand reality instead of seeking to understand what makes me feel politically satisfied because of my ideology. I know this would be harder for me to personally take those words if the opinion was going against the opinion I have, but it's still true. Reality is what matters, and political ideology only goes as far as earshot. As soon as we get out of range of hearing of the voice who's saying their ideology at us, we are out of their influence. So it's better to just look at the situations as they actually are. And I think this plan does a pretty good job. It's a good first start. And it is practical. It is vague where it needs to be vague for now. And it is quite clear where it needs to be quite clear for now. And believe it or not, folks, Ukraine is not the aggrieved nation. Yes, Russia went into Ukraine. Yes, Russia technically invaded Ukraine. Absolutely. But it did so because for at least 30 years, the West has been encroaching on Russian territory and Russian ideology, people, language, culture, Christianity, all of this stuff. And they've been looking for ways to destroy this country, either economically or even militarily, to try to do anything to secure a place in the woke world order for a non-Christian society. And Russia stands as a society that is at least marginally Orthodox Christian, certainly very traditional, has a no-nonsense set of family and cultural values, such as what the United States used to embody the best of. And there are liberal people who simply want that to stop, and they are absolutely inflamed that in a modern world there would be any country on earth that would dare defy the march of liberal progress. And yet here is Russia, is not only a country that does it, but as the most powerful nuclear armed country on earth, with great territory, deep history, great patience, and a long-lasting culture with people that are totally dedicated to preserving it. And they're not going to let that happen. So this is what the fight has really been about. I thank you very much for listening to this long video. I hope that you enjoy it. If you do, share it with others, give me a like, write me some notes or suggestions, tell me what you think. And if you want to get more videos like this, write me about that too. I'd be happy to do something if it's something that anybody wants to hear. My name is Seraphim Hanish. I am the American in Exile. I hope to see you guys again when it comes time to say something again. Take care. Farewell.